Every summer has its own rhythm. August certainly does. The opera season pauses, festival life takes over, and many of us are traveling rather than sitting in our usual theatre seats, whether they be in the auditorium, in offices, on piano benches, in rehearsal rooms or orchestra pits. Opera itself seems to breathe differently in August. And I thought, so should this month's episode of Opera Road Trip. I'm your host, Sebastian Schwarz, and there will be no new country for us to visit today. No border to cross, no interview waiting at the other end of the journey. Instead, before we continue traveling through Europe's operatic landscape next month, I'd like to pause for a while and look back. As I'm recording this program, I'm in Ukraine. Just over a year ago, I came here to record the conversations that became our episode on Ukrainian opera. At the time, despite everything, theatres were still performing, rehearsals continued whenever circumstances allowed, and artists spoke with remarkable openness about making opera in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. This week, the rhythm has been rather different, with the theatres being on their holiday break, and like so many people here, I have spent part of the last few nights listening not to overtures but to air raid alarms. It is a sobering reminder that culture never exists separately from life. Opera has always lived within history, joyful, painful, often unpredictable. Over the past 11 months, we have traveled together from Italy to Ukraine, from Ireland to Vienna, from Croatia to Poland, through the United Kingdom, France, Belgium, and most recently to the Czech Republic. Along the way, we have met singers, conductors, artistic directors, composers, stage directors, critics, and many of the people whose work keeps opera evolving. Each conversation has been different. Yet, looking back, I find myself returning to many of the same questions. Not questions about one country, one composer, or one opera house. Questions about opera itself. How does it actually work? Why has it survived for more than 400 years? Why do people continue devoting their lives to an art form that demands so much from everyone involved? And, most importantly, why does it still matter? This month's episode isn't intended to answer every one of those questions. Rather, I'd like to share a few observations that have emerged from our journey together. Not conclusions, simply things that have struck me while traveling through Europe's strikingly varied operatic landscape. One of the first things I noticed is how easily we speak about the opera world as though it were one place. It isn't. The traditions of Dublin are not those of Prague, Brussels does not resemble Milan, and we heard from Valérie Chevalier in Montpellier how not just every country, but every city has developed its own traditions, its own audiences, its own artistic priorities. And yet, beneath those differences, I kept hearing very similar conversations. How do we attract new audiences? How do we create opportunities for young artists? How do we tell familiar stories in ways that still surprise audiences? Those questions surfaced almost everywhere we went. While opera may be wonderfully local, its challenges have become increasingly international. And that should not surprise us. Artists travel more than ever before, productions cross borders, young musicians may study in one country, begin their careers in another, and eventually settle somewhere entirely different. Opera has always traveled just like the people who make it. That is one reason why Opera Road Trip has always felt like such an appropriate title. If there's one lesson our journey has taught me, it is this. The most successful opera houses know exactly who they are. I've become increasingly convinced that artistic identity and a clearly defined mission matter just as much as artistic quality. Some opera houses are deeply rooted in their local communities, others think internationally. Some cherish a resident ensemble, others invite artists from all over the world for every production. Some are famous for innovation, others for preserving tradition. None of those choices are automatically right or wrong. What matters is clarity. The houses that stay with us are usually those that know what they stand for and that know just how to communicate that to their audiences. And audiences notice. One expression has always made me slightly uncomfortable. We often hear that opera audiences are conservative. I'm no longer convinced that's true. Curious is the word I would choose instead. Curious enough to travel, curious enough to discover unfamiliar repertoire, curious enough to spend an evening with an interpretation that challenges them. What they ask in return is something rather reasonable. They want to trust the people inviting them on that journey. Not every new production will be loved, nor should it be. Art would become rather dull if everyone agreed all the time. But audiences recognize honesty, they recognize thoughtfulness, and they recognize artistic conviction. And that probably matters more than whether the evening turns out to be comfortable. Not long ago, I found myself sitting in the Opéra de Lyon during a performance of Benjamin Britten's Billy Budd. There's a moment in the opera when the sailors sing some rather unflattering things about the French, calling them enemies of righteousness, mocking their language and their customs. Sitting in a French opera house, I found myself looking around for a reaction. There was none. None at all. The audience understood perfectly that this was neither a political statement nor a comment on modern France. It was the dramatic world of that opera, of that story of 1797. A few weeks later, I saw exactly the same opera at Glyndebourne. This time it was sung for a predominantly English audience. And here a gentle ripple of laughter passed through the auditorium. Hearing the words directly, without the mediation of surtitles, changes the immediacy of the moment. The subtleties of humor often travel differently in one's own language. Whatever the explanation, I came away reminded that every audience completes the performance in its own way. Watching opera, I often find myself watching the audience as much as the stage. That relationship fascinates me, because no performance is ever completed by the artists alone. It only truly comes alive when someone is there to receive it. When I speak with friends who don't regularly go to the opera, and yes, I do have them around me too, sooner or later one question almost always comes up. So how does all this actually work? It's a wonderfully simple question, and yet the answer is anything but simple. One of the first surprises for many people is time. Opera moves on a very different time scale from most of modern life. Today we are used to ordering almost anything with the touch of a screen. News arrives instantly, messages travel around the world in seconds. Opera is wonderfully resistant to that rhythm. A production you see next season may have begun live 3 or even 4 years earlier. Long before the first rehearsal, someone has imagined the season. Repertoire has been discussed, conductors approached, directors invited, designers have begun sketching worlds that do not yet exist. Casting conversations often start years in advance simply because otherwise the artists everyone hopes to engage are already committed elsewhere. Then there are the practical questions. Will we get enough time with the orchestra? Can the chorus rehearse that day? When can scenery be built? Will the costumes be ready? Can one rehearsal room accommodate everyone who needs to be rehearsed on a particular afternoon? None of these things are especially glamorous, yet together they form the invisible architecture that allows the curtain eventually to rise. Whenever I see the Swan and Lohengrin gliding across the lake, I'm reminded of an opera production process. Beneath the calm surface, an enormous amount of unseen work is taking place. If everything has gone well, the audience never notices. They simply see grace. And that is exactly how it should be. Another question appears rather regularly. Why do singers cancel? It is one of those moments audiences naturally remember. You've looked forward to hearing a particular artist. Maybe you have even traveled halfway across the world for that particular constellation of singers. The announcement comes, a replacement steps in, disappointment is perfectly understandable. Yet the reasons behind cancellations are often much more ordinary than people imagine. Of course, illness plays a part. A singer's voice is an exceptionally complex and delicate instrument. Just like humidity, temperature, or the tiniest adjustment can alter the quality of the sound or the strength of a violin, an infection, allergies, or simply physical exhaustion may reduce the voice's freedom, its color, and its ability to project. Sometimes the body simply says, "Not today." And unlike a violin, the instrument cannot simply be repaired or replaced. The human voice has only time, rest, and recovery. But voices are not the only reason for cancellations. Flights are delayed, families have emergencies, documents expire at exactly the wrong moment, or there are not enough days left on a work permit. And sometimes life has an unexpected sense of humor. Not long ago, a singer's perfectly enjoyable day in a Tuscan countryside spa ended in an enormous traffic jam on the motorway back to Milan, on a stretch made of only tunnels and bridges, and from where, therefore, even a helicopter was not able to heave her out and onto the stage of La Scala. What began as an ordinary delay very quickly became an opera house problem. Within minutes, artistic administration, stage management, the conductor, fellow singers, wardrobe, makeup, technical departments, and countless others all quietly adjusted their plans. The alternative cast went on and saved the performance. The audience may only hear a short announcement before the performance. Behind that announcement stands an impressive act of teamwork. In many ways, that quiet professionalism is one of the things I admire about opera. When everything works perfectly, nobody notices, which, in a curious way, means everyone has succeeded. Then there's another question I have been asked more times than I can count. Why don't opera singers use microphones? Opera and theatre architecture evolved together. From the salons of the Florentine aristocracy around 1600, so almost 300 years before the first practical microphones were invented, via the first Baroque theatres with around 400 seats, to today's auditoriums which can welcome up to almost 4,000 listeners. Composers wrote for particular theatres as much as for particular voices, back then as much as today. Architects designed theatres around the human voice. Orchestras developed in dialogue with singers. Each influenced the other. Nothing happened in isolation, and it still doesn't. Opera remains one of the very few places where music, theatre, literature, architecture, visual art, craftsmanship, and technology continue to work side by side in the service of one shared purpose: telling a story live. And yet, after all that collaboration, after all those hundreds of people working together, the moment of truth often comes down to something deceptively simple. Somewhere in front of an orchestra of 70 or 80 musicians stands a single human being. No electronics, no amplification, nothing except breath, technique, imagination, and years of patient work. When it succeeds, it can still feel almost miraculous. We have become so accustomed to amplified and acoustically altered sound that we sometimes forget what an extraordinary thing the natural or unplugged human voice really is. Then there is the question everyone eventually asks: why is opera so expensive? And it is expensive. There's no point pretending otherwise. It always has been, and probably it always will be. But instead of asking why opera costs so much, we should ask what it is that we are actually paying for. When most people picture an evening at the opera, they picture the visible performers, the soloists, the chorus, the orchestra, perhaps the conductor. But let us take an extreme example. Peter Maxwell Davies once wrote a monodrama, Miss Donnythorne's Maggot, in which a single mezzo-soprano performs alone on stage for half an hour. But even she performs in a world someone has designed and someone else has built. She wears costumes that have been created for her. She has worked with coaches and repetiteurs. She is lit by lighting designers and technicians. Someone has rehearsed the stage changes, prepared the props, copied the music, welcomed the audience, and ensured the building is safe. Opera gathers together an astonishing range of professions. At Teatro La Scala or the Vienna State Opera, around 1,000 people work across almost 150 different professions. Most of their names never appear in reviews, yet without their expertise, there would be no performance. That is what we are paying for. Not simply an evening's entertainment, but the combined knowledge, craftsmanship, and experience of hundreds of people working together to create something that exists only for a few hours. Opera is expensive because it is profoundly human, and I rather hope it always will be. Looking back over the journey we have shared during the past year, one conclusion has become very clear to me. I do not worry about the future of opera. Not because its future is guaranteed. Nothing in culture ever is. But because everywhere I traveled, I met people quietly shaping its future. Young singers refining their craft, conductors searching for new perspectives, directors asking new questions of familiar works, teachers passing on their experience, technicians, craftspeople, and administrators solving problems long before the audience arrives, and audiences who remain curious enough to keep discovering something new. Today's singers are among the best trained generations opera has ever known. Technical knowledge, stylistic awareness, and international exchange have never been greater. There's still much to learn, and there always will be. Fortunately, art that believes it has reached perfection has usually stopped being alive. My confidence, however, is not based on artistic excellence alone. It is based on what opera can still teach us. Opera teaches us to listen. Real listening, not waiting for our turn to speak, but responding to one another. Nothing in an opera house functions without it. Singers listen to conductors. Conductors listen to singers and orchestras. Musicians listen to one another. So does the chorus. They even breathe together. Music begins with listening, and so does living together. Opera reminds us of that every single evening. That's why I have come to see an opera house as a hopeful model of society. Take the theatres in Vienna or Milan again. Here, on any given day, people from 46 nationalities work together under one roof. People with different languages, different traditions, and different ways of thinking. Every day they demonstrate that astonishing things become possible when people learn to communicate with one another, respect one another's expertise, and work towards a common goal. Opera does not simply tell stories about humanity. Every day it demonstrates humanity at work. And then there are the stories. Opera has never really been about kings, queens, gods, or mythical heroes alone. It has always been about the people behind these titles. People making good decisions, bad decisions, and sometimes impossible ones. People falling in love, misunderstanding one another, seeking power, forgiveness, or redemption. Think of almost any great operatic character. Don Giovanni, Violetta, Wozzeck, Jenuffa. They are memorable not because they are perfect, but because they are recognizably human. They make mistakes. They misunderstand one another, they love, they fail, they forgive, and sometimes they don't. The costumes change, our understanding changes. Human nature does not nearly as much. 400 years later, we still recognize ourselves in them. There's one image that has stayed with me throughout this journey. Not a famous theater, not a celebrated singer, simply the moment before a performance begins. House lights fade, conversations stop, the conductor walks into the pit. For a brief second, hundreds, sometimes thousands of strangers share equally many variations of the same expectation. Nothing has happened yet, and yet something already has. They have become an audience. In a world where so much of life is experienced individually, through phones, tablets, and headphones, gathering together for one unrepeatable, shared experience has become something precious. That, for me, is opera's greatest relevance. It gives us the opportunity to experience music, theatre, and storytelling together, live, in the same room, at the same moment. Thank you for joining me today for these August reflections of mine, and thank you for accompanying me this far on our opera road trip. Next month we will be back on the road again to continue our explorations of our European operatic traditions. As usual, no hint about where we go next, but do let me know if you want to hear about any country in particular over the coming months. Throughout this episode, you have heard excerpts from the overture of Mozart's Le Nozze di Figaro from the Royal Opera and Ballet in London, and the prelude from Wagner's Die Meistersinger von Nürnberg from Teatro Real in Madrid. And My bonus track for you today is the full version of Elisabeth's aria Dich teure Halle grüß ich wieder from Wagner's Tannhäuser, with the young Lisa Davidson in a rare recording from when she won the Queen Sonja singing competition back in 2015. I must not forget to invite you also to have a look at the interesting contributions from opera houses across Europe made available to you on operavision.eu. There is Falstaff from Barcelona and Masquerade's Villa Bel Canto from Parma. I hope you will join me again for our next episode a month from now. This series is curated, edited and presented by me, Sebastian Schwarz, for OperaVision, whose team I thank for their support. OperaVision is supported by the Creative Europe program of the European Union in the framework of the Opera Europa Next Generation platform. Until next time, keep singing, keep questioning, and take care.
Die Freude